Good morning, afternoon, or evening, my dear language learning master. Welcome back to Natural Languages. And today I'm actually going to start a podcast on the most common questions around language learning, about how the process actually works, how long it takes, like any question surrounding the world of languages, all right? And this episode is going to be about is grammar actually necessary in order to learn a language, or grammar study necessary in order to learn a language? And I also wanted to remind you to use the comment section down below to, one, tell me your opinion on this specific topic, and two, any question you may have concerning language learning, just leave it in the comment section down below, and I'll create a future episode with it. All right. So that's I want to help you out with that, and that's going to help me out as well, because you're going to give me ideas for future episodes. All right. And last thing on the first comment, and I'm actually going to leave the actual podcast, the link to the actual podcast, so you can listen to it if you want. But I mean, you're going to be able to listen to the same podcast here, and I'll use a background of different Spanish cities, like a video background of different Spanish cities, for you to travel while listening to the podcast. All right. And for this first episode, I'm gonna use Barcelona. So you're gonna see videos of Barcelona in the background while listening to episode number 1 of this podcast. All right. So hope this is useful for you guys. And like I said, any questions you may have in regards to language learning, don't be afraid to comment down below, because you'll be helping me out with ideas for future episodes, and I'll be happy to help you out as well. All right. So with that being said, let's go with episode number 1 of this podcast. Hello, how you doing, my dear language learning masters? Well, welcome to episode number 1 of this podcast called Language Input, in which I'm gonna answer the most common questions when it comes to language learning, and also I'm gonna talk about the most common misconceptions, or about misinformation about around language learning, because I've seen it, I've felt it myself. I see it in my students. I see it everywhere I go, that because of the dominance of what I call the traditional grammar approach, we just don't really know how to learn a language. And there's so many people frustrated because of it. When learning languages is actually fun, it's an enjoyable process. So that's what I want. That's the message I want to convey with my podcast. All right. So whether you're listening to this on the actual podcast format, or you're listening to it on YouTube, I encourage you to leave your comments, with your opinion on this specific episode, and also with any questions you may have when it comes around, how to learn a language, how languages are actually acquired. Can I learn a language in 3 months? I'll talk about that in a future episode. But because I'm gonna create episodes on the most common questions that I'm asked all the time. But I'm sure there are many, many questions that I've never thought about that you may have in mind. And so, just leave your comment, and I'll create a future episode with your questions, guys. So, with that being said, thanks so much for being here, and let's get started. And the first question is grammar study actually necessary in order to learn a language? And, well, I want you to listen to the full episode, right? But let me be clear here. Absolutely not. Yes, you heard that right. Absolutely not. And I'm going to tell you why in a moment, of course. But I think this is just excellent news, because believe me, I've also struggled learning languages in the past when all I knew was the traditional grammar approach of constantly studying grammar rules, memorizing vocabulary lists, and so on. That led to frustration. And I'm sure you can relate to that, because it's a painful process, and it doesn't get it done. Yeah, I just couldn't use the language. With English, for instance, I could pass pretty much any grammar exam, but I just couldn't speak the language, and I'm pretty sure you can relate to that in any language that you're trying to learn. And so yeah, that's the most important thing. But the reason why studying grammar is not necessary is because that's actually linguistics. That has nothing to do with real language acquisition. Okay, and I'm sure you can relate to this as well. When we learn a language when we try, because it's never gonna work. When we try to learn a language by consciously studying grammar rules, memorizing vocabulary lists, and so on, the result of that is when you're trying to speak in a foreign language, in the language you're trying to learn, you have to painfully think about everything you want to say, right? Can you relate to that feeling? Yeah. And that's because in a real-time conversation, you just don't have the time to think about what you want to say. You don't have the time to access that conscious knowledge that you got from, like I said, from traditional grammar classes. And that's why, if you've noticed, that's why most people, when they speak in a foreign language, they have a sort of hesitant style with a lot of pauses, like, you know what I mean, right? Because that's because they're trying to access that conscious knowledge they got from grammar classes, right? And because we're used to doing grammar exercises in which we have all the time in the world to think about what we want to say or write down, we think that's the way to learn language, but it's not. And any person who's gone out to the real world and tried to speak the language knows that it's a completely different process. In a real-time conversation, you don't have the time to think about what you want to say. It's supposed to be natural and spontaneous, isn't it? Right? And I'll talk about this in most of the episodes, but the way to achieve that is comprehensible input. That's the key to the entire process. We learn a language by getting comprehensible input. And our output will eventually show up as a consequence, as a result. That's the most important thing to understand. So our output, our what we call practice, is not the cause of our improvement. It's a result of our improvement through comprehensible input, okay? And again, I'll talk about this more in depth in future episodes, but this is nothing but the same process by which we all acquire our native languages, all right? Which is a process that works 100% of the time, by the way. But anyway, I don't know at what point of history we adults decided that we should learn languages differently, but that's a different topic. Anyway. Yeah, and actually I'm going to give you a couple of examples to prove my point further. Let's put it that way, okay? And, I don't know if you speakers out there know Spanish or are learning Spanish or trying to learn the language, all right? But I'm going to give you an example, but I'm going to explain what it means, so don't worry. Actually, in Spanish, the word for broken, all right, is roto, all right? And that's an irregular conjugation, all right? But that's the right one. But what happens here? Every single Spanish-speaking kid says rompido at the beginning, which is incorrect, but it would be the regular conjugation, right? And you might be thinking, what's this guy talking about here? Wait a moment. What that tells us is that through comprehensible input and other examples like comer, to eat, comido, eaten, beber, to drink, bebido, drank. So what that tells us, which is excellent news, and you're going to see why, is that through comprehensible input and other examples, the language mechanism in the kid brains actually develops the language rule, the participle in this case. I'm not an expert on that, but yeah, that's the one I think. So the language mechanism in the kid's brain develops the language rule subconsciously. This is key, subconsciously, without having to actually learn it or study it consciously, right? And this is actually great news, because that tells us that we don't need to consciously study grammar rules. And I'm going to give you more examples in a moment, don't worry. And well, I'll also talk about this in more depth in the future, but when every single kid says rompido at the beginning, again, which is incorrect, but it would be the regular conjugation. Most parents, I said 99% of them, try to consciously correct their kid's mistake by saying, sorry, sweetie, but it's actually roto, not rompido, all right? And guess what? What does the kid say the next time? Rompido. And again, and again, and again. Again, which is the regular conjugation, but the incorrect form, all right? And so that's, I'll talk about that on an episode on error correction, okay? But that tells us that consciously knowing the grammar rules, or consciously knowing the rule, which in this case is an exception to the rule, doesn't actually help us produce it the right way in a real-time conversation, right? And what the kid actually needs in order to produce that right in the future is to listen to it many times in context, all right? But I'll talk about error correction more in depth in a future episode, all right? And what else? Yeah, when I talk about this topic, many people argue, or many people tell me that, okay, I sort of agree with you, but kids do get, grammar classes when they go to school, right? In the native language, I mean. And my answer is, first of all, pay attention to the fact that when they start going to grammar classes, they all can communicate perfectly in the language, all right? I mean, they don't speak English, for instance, like Shakespeare, but they can perfectly communicate in the language, right? So that's point number one. Like, that happens afterwards, which is key as well. And second of all, I'd actually like to sort of analyze really deeply what helps kids learn the language, because I'm sure those grammar classes shouldn't get the credit for that, Actually, I'm sure that all the stories their parents read to them, their grandparents, or all the all the conversation with their peers, with their friends, stories they talk about in class. So we actually give grammar the credit, or grammar study the credit, when it shouldn't be given to that, right? So it's a matter of actually analyzing what's helping them. But believe me, I'm sure those conscious, explicit grammar lessons are not helping them become more proficient in the language. Okay, let's put it that way. Because, let me give you another example. I'm sure whatever your native language, have you noticed that when a foreigner a foreigner or even a native speaker speaks your native language and they make a grammar mistake, even though you don't really know many times what specific rule was broken there, but you get a certain feeling of, that just doesn't sound right. You know what I mean, right? Like, it's just something in your brain or your mind that tells you, it just doesn't sound right to me. And even though you may not know what specific rule is being broken there, right? Can you relate to that? I'm sure you can. And once again, that's because through comprehensible input, we develop a sort of, like Stephen Krashen put it, feeling of correctness, which is totally independent from explicit conscious grammar study. So what that tells us is we don't need to study grammar in order to actually communicate better. So what I want to convey here in the whole episode is that I'm not saying that grammar is not important. All I'm saying is we don't need to actually study it. We don't need to consciously study it explicitly, because the language mechanism in our brain is going to do it on its own, like subconsciously. And that's actually great news, because we don't have to worry about it. I know we adults are so used to wanting to have conscious control over everything we can, right? But it just doesn't work that way, all right? And yeah, so that's pretty much what I wanted to tell you guys. And like I said, leave your comment whether you're watching. I mean, whether you're watching on YouTube or you're listening to the actual podcast. Leave your comments because I'd really appreciate it. And yeah, you can give me more ideas for future episodes. But before we wrap things up here, I also want to talk. I want to go a step farther because everything I've been talking so far is, this has been proved by many awesome studies by Stephen Krashen and many other researchers who have proven over and over again that comprehensible input-based learning is way superior to traditional methods. And whoever is interested in diving deeper into it, just drop me an email or leave a comment. I'll be happy to lead you into some of these research or studies. All right. But yeah, I want to be clear on this. What I'm about to talk about is just my personal feeling. Okay, so I haven't seen any research to back this up. I haven't done it myself. So I want to be clear on that. This is my personal opinion, all right? And my personal opinion is that conscious grammar study, not only does it not help when it comes to learning a language, but I'm starting to believe it's actually counterproductive, or it actually gets in the way. And why am I saying that? Because with all the languages that I speak, actually I started learning Italian like 3 years ago. Now it's 2020, so 3 years ago. And with French and Portuguese, I actually started before that, like a couple of years before that. Well, French a year before that, and Portuguese a couple of years before that. And at that point, I mean, when I started learning Portuguese, I didn't know about all this. So I did study some grammar consciously because that's all I knew, right? Like pretty much everyone. And then French, when I started learning French again, I started with comprehensible input, all right? But when I was younger, in high school, I did study some grammar. So, I with Italian, I just wanted to make sure that I can learn a language without any contact with grammar study. Like 0 minutes, literally 0. And I'm starting to see, I don't know if that's because Italian is related to Spanish, but so are French and Portuguese, right? And what I'm starting to notice is when I'm communicating in Italian, it's way more natural, or I never have to think about what I want to say, or it comes out of my mouth more naturally. Whereas with Portuguese and French, it's still natural because most of the things I've done are based on comprehensible input. But because of that grammar study, sometimes when I'm about to speak, I sort of double check with my brain. I don't know if that makes sense, but double check, or it's like that grammar monitor, as Stephen Krashen puts it, that before I speak, it stops me for a split second to tell me, or to think about, is that right? Is that wrong? You know what I mean? Whereas in Italian, all I have to lean on is my actual subconscious knowledge through comprehensible input. So I have no conscious grammar knowledge to back me up. Let's put it that way, okay? And I'm noticing that, and again, like I said, this is my opinion, my experience. So there's no research to back this up. It's just a feeling, all right? But what I'm sure about is that it's not necessary to learn a language. So, if you like grammar, okay, good luck. No, just kidding. If you like grammar, feel free to do it, to study if you want, but please do it afterwards, once you can perfectly communicate in the language. Because otherwise, it's just going to lead you to frustration. But when it comes to my personal journey, I'm never going to do it because it's painful, it's boring, and it's not necessary to speak the language. And even if you want to write letters, or you want to write a book, or any official essays or whatever, you don't need to actually study grammar, because you might think it could be useful in that sense because you do have the time to think about everything you want to say, and it could be helpful in that way. And okay, good, but you're gonna get the same results by reading wonderful books you're actually interested in, you know. So that's also how you're gonna learn to express yourself in a better way, or to write things down uh, closer to a native speaker, right? Which is something most of us want, eventually. But the most important thing that I want to talk about here is that we don't need to study grammar in order to learn a language. It's that simple, and I think that's excellent news. You know, so I hope you agree with me, and if you don't, like I said, yeah, feel free to leave your comments as well. I'll be happy to talk about this topic, and leave me your ideas as well. Like I said. And with that being said, thank you all for listening to this episode, and I'll see you in the next one, episode number 2 of the Language Input Podcast. Thank you, everyone. Bye bye, and have a good day, wherever you might be.